Well, hello everybody, and welcome once again to another episode. And today we're going to look at some film point and shoot cameras. These are the simplest of the film cameras, and they were once very popular. Pretty much every household had something like this to record family events and so on. They were very popular. We've got cameras here from the late 1950s up to, I think, the late 80s, early 90s sometimes. So we're covering quite a lot of years and quite a lot of changes in technology. Some of these cameras have full automation, some have partial automation, and some have no automation at all. But they're all a great way to shoot some film. Now, all of these cameras are cost effective and some of them are really cheap. They all can be found for less than £100 and some can be found for less than £20. Film can be slow, it can be more difficult to use, so why use it? Well, firstly because these are great little cameras, they're just so much fun to use. Film is where it started, and using film will make you a better photographer. Why? Well, you have to work that bit harder to master the medium. You've got to work within constraints. For example, you'll probably never shoot above 400 ISO because there are not many films made above that rating, and quite often the older cameras can't handle anything over 400. In fact, some can only handle up to 200 or so. So film photography gives you constraints, and it's more hit and miss as well. So it's more rewarding when you do get it right. It's a bit like the difference between driving a modern bang up to the minute car with ABS and electronic this, that and the other, and collision warnings and all the modern systems that modern cars have, and an older car like maybe one of these, where you have to understand how the car behaves in order to drive it safely. So it's just the same with these cameras. You know, you're doing much of the work, certainly in the partly automated ones or in the manual ones, you're doing much of the work that the processor does, and that will make you a better photographer. Alright, so the first camera we're going to look at today is this beautiful little thing from the early 60s or maybe late 50s sometime. It's got a very futuristic space age look, and it's a very groovy looking thing indeed. It's the Olympus Pen EE-S, and this is a half frame camera. This takes 72 shots on a roll of film rather than 36, and it has an APS-C sized frame, and that's how it squeezes those extra images on there. Let me show you what I mean. So we've got a roll of film here that I've just run through the camera, and first of all let's look at an ordinary piece of film shot in a standard 35mm camera, and you can see there that the frames are in this orientation, and they run sort of the lengthwise of the film in that orientation, right? So a half frame piece of film, it shoots its images from top to bottom, so you get an APS-C sized frame and double the number of images on a roll of film, and I think that is a really cool feature to have. It would be even cooler if we could actually get some focus and let you see this properly. There we are. So there's the top to bottom images on the half frame camera, and I've been shooting this camera this week, and I kept shooting it and clicking it, and the film just would not run out because, you know, 72 shots is quite a lot. Let me show you the camera itself. It's a beautiful little piece of space age design. I don't think you could get more space age than that. That is as space age as it gets. It's fantastic. It's got this beautiful big selenium cell for the light meter around here. it has a 35mm D Zuiko f2.8 lens. So effectively, that will give you a field of view of around about 50mm or so. So you get the standard sort of shot from it. The focusing is not automatic, but it's very, very simple. It's just all done with symbols. I would imagine the minimum distance is 3 feet. So we turn to the first position. They've each got click stops, and they're not terribly easy to see, but they are easy to feel. So the first position is for photographing a portrait of one person. The next, that must be about 3 feet. The next position, marked in red here, is for photographing a group of several people. I don't know if you can see that clearly. So that must be about 6 foot or so. And then we've got mountains, which is clearly infinity. Notice the viewfinder runs from top to bottom, so that when you want to take a landscape image, you have to shoot the camera like this, and when you want to take a portrait image, then it shoots like this. You hold it like this. So to get the back off, this is a very, very nicely made camera, by the way, and it's quite heavy as well. Plenty of weight in it, and it's clearly well made using good quality components. There's the gate, and you can see that it runs from top to bottom. So to get a landscape orientation, you turn the camera this way. Portrait orientation, you turn the camera this way, because the gate runs top to bottom. Let's just pop the back on. Now, being an early camera, or a fairly early camera, it has a fairly limited range of ISO settings, and it goes only up to 200 ISO, or ASA, in fact, as it used to be called in the film days. So you see what I mean about working within constraints, and these cameras really do make you understand the process of photography and just become nearer to it. I think film is nearer to the actual process of making images than digital is. Digital always seems slightly removed, one step removed, but this is as real as it gets. Now, one great thing about these cameras is that because the frame is smaller, because the frame is APS-C sized rather than full frame sized, these cameras will give you an image that has very deep depth of field, and it's not so easy to get background blur with one of these because of the lens and the size of the image that's being made. But the converse of that, the upside of that, is that if you do make an error in focusing, and you almost certainly will using manual focusing, this camera is very accommodating because there's so much depth of field, there's so much in focus. You can often find that you can make an error in focusing and it just doesn't show up. The images look pretty sharp anyway. So this is a very forgiving camera to use. A smaller frame, of course, will give you that little bit more film grain, that little bit more noise for a given speed of film. You're unlikely to notice it with the slower films like 100 or 200, but if you get up to 400 and beyond, you may start to notice that these half frame images will be a little bit noisier than their full frame equivalents. And it does make some really nice images as well. I've only shot one roll through it, but I was astonished with the sharpness of the images, with their quality, with the number of good images that I got. Usually on full frame I'll find there are, some more errors than I made using this camera. Is a very, very simple, very, very easy, very, very likeable camera. I wasn't sure about it at first. It felt a bit like a toy, but I used it and I shot it and it really grew on me. And I'm going to keep this one. I'm not getting rid of this one. These Olympus half-frame cameras are fantastic little film cameras and a great way into film if you've not shot film before. Price-wise, well, you'll find a good one they're often advertised for around £80 or thereabouts. If you're lucky and you're patient, you could probably find one for around £50 or £60. A great little camera, very solidly made, very nicely built, with a fantastic lens that makes great images as well. A real good camera, and one that you should seriously consider if you're looking for a film point and shoot. Okay, next we're going to look at a 1950s consumer camera. I think this is mid-50s sometime. It's certainly got that mid-50s look about it. It's the Kodak Retinette 1A, and the Retinette cameras are the cheaper relatives, the sort of consumer versions of the Retina, Kodak Retina cameras. But they're not cheap and nasty. This is a very nicely made, nicely built camera. The Retina camera, which this is the cheaper relative of, is now highly collectible. These are not, and that means that they're cheap. And they're a great first film camera, or a great film camera for anybody if you want to get into some film. It's very, very nicely made. It feels really solid, and I think back in the day these cameras sold for the equivalent, I was reading, they sold for the equivalent of about £400. So this was not an insignificant machine in its day. In its day it was something that you could take seriously as a camera, and you can still take it seriously now. It's a really nice thing. It's a totally manual camera. There are no focusing aids at all. There's not a rangefinder, nothing. You just have to get used to working out distances and being able to measure distances in your head, or stop the aperture down, shoot it at f4, f5.6 and zone focus. So there's no focusing aids. There are no exposure aids at all either, not even a light meter. There's a window here that looks like it might be for a light meter, but it's not. It's just a window. So this is about as simple as it gets. You might say that an old 30s Leica is simple, but actually those cameras have more shutter speeds than this one. So this, despite being later, is even simpler. So you'll need a light meter for your exposure settings. If you're familiar with the way light works, or after you've practiced for a bit, you'll be able to use the Sunny 16 rule, and you won't really need a meter. It's quite easy to use once you get to know it. So this is a simple machine, but it's also very nicely made as well. It's a real quality camera. Let's go in for a closer look. Now, I don't know how much of this comes across, but this really is a beautifully made camera, and this one seems to have had very little use, and that's often the way with these consumer cameras. They get used only very rarely for, I don't know, birthdays or annual holidays or something like that. So there's lots of good ones still left around for pretty cheap. It's a good looking camera. It's very simple. It's got focusing on the front here. Let's take the filter off. It's got a blue filter on it just at the moment. That must be an original Kodak filter, I think. So there's our focus ring, just where we'd expect to find it. I can't actually see any markings on it. Oh yes, it's marked in meters and in feet. And as was usual for the time, the minimum focus distance is 3 feet. Shutter speeds are set on this dial here. So we'll wind it on underneath the camera. The wind on lever is underneath the camera, so we'll wind it on. And we can then set the shutter speed. Apparently you can change the speeds on this camera without winding on, but I don't know. It's a very old mechanism, so I don't want to test it. So it's got its highest speed is 1/250th, and listen to that lovely silent shutter. Oh, how wonderful is that? And then it will also do 1/30th and B. Here's a 30th. That sounds about right. And B as well. Open and close. Very, very simple. Aperture adjustment is done on the back here by a tab. So max aperture is 2.8 on this lens, and it goes all the way over to f22. So everything's in really easy reach for your finger. All the three main controls are easily in reach for your finger to use here. And the quietness of the shutter on this camera, and in fact most of the other cameras we've got here today, means that they're great for shooting on the street. So that's always a good thing too. Very simple camera and very nicely made. Now this lens has a good reputation. It's a simple triplet lens. It's not a complex lens at all, but it does have a good reputation. It's not particularly sharp wide open. I think that f2.8 setting really was for just letting in as much light as you could to get the most light in your image as you could, so you could get an exposure. I think it's probably best shot around f4, f5.6. So if you put a roll of 400 in here, 400 ISO film, close down to 5.6, zone focus, you've got yourself a really neat street camera. It's not a threatening camera, it's old, it's a conversation piece, it's got a very quiet shutter, so you're not going to intimidate anybody with a camera like this, and it really is perfect for street. This is a really good camera for building your photography skills on, because there's absolutely no automation at all you've got is the bare bones. So it's great if you want to do that. As far as cost goes, well, you can often find these cameras for as little as £10 or £20. They're really not sought after, and that means that the field is wide open. You can buy these all day long in good condition, cheaply, and they're a great way into film photography. Okay, the next camera we're going to look at today is this one. Found it eventually. It's the Olympus Trip 35, and this is a very similar camera in some ways to the little pen half frame that we looked at earlier. This is one of my favourite 35mm point and shoots. It's a lovely little thing. It's styling. As with all things, Olympus seems to perfectly define its time. This is a lovely little point and shoot camera. It has automatic exposure. There's a big selenium cell around the front there. There are no focusing aids except for the images and zone, or rather symbols that we need to turn the lens to. The aperture runs from f2.8 up to, again, f22, but usually you just leave this one on auto and let it get on with doing its thing. There's no real need to do anything else with this camera, and in fact the other aperture numbers are for flash anyway, so pretty much to all intents and purposes exposure on this camera is totally automatic. Let's have a closer look, and look at that. There's more grooviness from the age of the analog. Is that not a wondrous thing? This camera's styling, I feel, perfectly defines its time. There's that beautiful big selenium cell meter there, nice little f2.8 lens there, a simple viewfinder, no focusing aids. There are the focusing symbols. So what have we got? Oh yeah, so it's pretty similar to the previous camera, the Pen EE-S. We've even got the mountain symbol there and various other symbols for closer focusing work. The wind on is in the same position as the pen on the back there, and it's a very, very convenient place. And if there isn't enough light to operate, then a little red flag comes up in the window there. It's not actually doing it right now, but both the Trip and the Pen have a little red flag that comes up in the viewfinder window if there's not enough light to take a picture. So a very, very fine little camera. One curiosity is that the aperture blades are, well, they're sort of angled and they make a square shape. They make a very angular shape. So if you do get some bokeh from this lens, if you do get some background blur, which is unlikely because you're going to be shooting at stop down apertures for most of the time, but if you can force it to give you some blur by shooting at the minimum focus distance, for example, you'll find that the blur from point light sources is square in shape, so it's actually quite unusual. This was a massively popular camera back in the day. These were the real cameras of the moment. They were everywhere, and they're still everywhere now. There are companies that restore these cameras. You can pick up a good used one for around £80 or thereabouts, maybe £100, something like that. So a similar price to the Pen EE half frame. This camera, of course, will use more film than the Pen. So seriously, oh, that was a fly. Nearly went right in my ear. So if I was looking for an Olympus point and shoot, I'd be, knowing what I know now, I'd be very tempted to go for the half frame rather than the full frame. But of course, it's your decision. You pays your money and takes your choice. Full frame does have slightly better resolution, but it is a little harder to focus. A beautiful little camera, very cool styling. For around about £80 to £100. Absolutely beautiful little thing. Now here's a camera from, I think, the late 70s, early 80s. This is the Konica C35 Rangefinder, 35mm camera, not a half frame, full frame, conventional sort of image size. And this is a really nice little camera. It has that rangefinder built into it, and that's a really handy thing to have. It means you've got a focusing aid. It means you don't have to guess. It means you're not mucking about with pictures of mountains and pictures of 2 people and pictures of 3 people and never really quite knowing where you should be. With a rangefinder, you will get your focusing absolutely precise and exact, and this has one built in. It's a very portable, very pocketable little camera. It's made by Konica, so I would expect it to have a very nice lens. It's got an f2.8 38mm, so that is close to the ideal of 40mm, which the Trip 35 over here has. So this should be a really nice focal length for street work and a really nice camera to take out into the street. Let's have a closer look at this lovely little machine. So there we are. There's our little Konica, and there's its lovely lens. I don't know if you can see any of those coatings in the light. You might be able to see some reflections off the colour there. Konica are some of my favourite lenses, and lens technology, they just couldn't be beaten. Colour technology, they just couldn't be beaten. And anybody who shoots a Konica lens, I think, is likely to feel that as well. It's a very simple top deck. Lever wind, nice and easy. Hot shoe here, and film rewind here. Shutter button there, and a nice quiet click. Minimum focus distance is 1 meter or 3.5 feet. Does it say 3.5? It does say 3.5. Yeah, minimum focus is about 3 feet or a meter anyway. And we've got an f2.8 lens. We've got a self-timer on this camera as well. So my goodness, this one is proper teched up. Let's open the back and show you inside. Standard sort of camera interior. Here's the gate, the full frame gate. This is where you put the film into. This is the handle that you wind it with when it's all done. You have to manually rewind it, which is pretty cool. So a very nice, simple little camera. It's really a take anywhere camera as well. This is so small, it fits into the palm of my hand. It's just tiny, and it's very, very nicely made as well. The body is finished in a very smooth coating, sort of covering of some sort, and yeah, I think that's plastic, actually. That's quite surprising. I thought that was metal, but it's actually a plastic top cover, but that's no problem. That's fine. Plastic's fine. It seems to have stood the test of time. Here it is after all these years. So a great little camera. Again, a very quiet shutter like all the cameras we've looked at so far. Fantastic little street camera. Auto exposure, so no problem worrying about exposure. Focusing nice and easy. And if you stop the aperture down, let's say to about f4 or thereabouts then, or 5.6, then you really have got quite a formidable street photography camera. Very quiet, again, very unobtrusive, very unassuming. It doesn't look threatening. It's the kind of camera you can take anywhere, click anywhere, and no one's going to notice. And you can make some really nice images with one of these. Price-wise, well, they tend to go for around £50 to £80 or thereabouts. They are worth that, I think. They're a very, very nice little camera and a very, very nice way to shoot some film. There's even a light meter in this camera as well. There's a little needle inside the viewfinder that shows you how much light there is and what sort of conditions the lighting is at. There's a very, very handy little tab there as well to turn the focus ring. So this becomes an even more and more ideal street camera. Just look at that little tab there. How handy that is. I know some of the Voigtlander, the modern Voigtlander lenses have this, and I think some of the Leica lenses do as well. But to see something like that on a camera this unassuming is really nice to see, and that's a great feature. It means you can have the camera to your eye and just focus very, very quickly. You can change all your parameters here and you just take your shot really quick. Lovely little bit of kit, £50 to £80. You really can't go wrong. Right, finally, a camera that I've used a lot and a camera that I really love. In fact, it might just be my favourite film camera. Never mind your Leicas, never mind your SLRs, this one has all it takes, and it's the Nikon L35 AF. And this is certainly my favourite film point and shoot. This camera does it all. It's got a fantastic f2.8 35mm lens. It's got very quick autofocus. It's got very accurate auto exposure. It's got auto film wind and it's got auto film rewind, but it doesn't rewind the film all the way into the canister, which is brilliant for me because I like to develop my own film, and it's very hard trying to fish a piece of film out of one of these if it's gone inside there. It can be done, but it's an esoteric art and I'm not very good at it, and I appreciate this camera very much because somebody at Nikon has thought, right, let's not wind the roll all the way in because somebody might want to do their own processing. That is careful design. This camera has, in fact, let's have a closer look at this camera. There it is. It's a big square brick of a thing, but it's a lovely big square brick of a thing. Just look at it. This is the only point and shoot camera I know, I'm sure there are others, but it's the only one I know that has a filter thread. Look, you can put filters on this camera. ND filters to bring down the light, coloured filters for black and white photography. It's got this lovely red stripe. This is so 80s, isn't it? It reminds me of Escort XR3s and that sort of design ilk. The top plate's really simple. It's got an on-off switch and a fire button, and that's it. That's all it has, and that's all you need. It's got a built-in flash. The back opens here. It's quite unconventional actually in its opening, but it just opens that way. and you put the film in, put your leader out to here, and it does all its electronic stuff. This is the latest camera of this group. It's also the most automated, and it's the easiest to use, and it's that rare thing. A fully automatic film point and shoot that actually works. This camera actually gets the exposure right. This camera actually gets the focus right, and sometimes it's uncanny actually, because it just seems to get the focus exactly where you want it. It's like a telepathic camera, but it gets better than that because it even has a little arrow, a little dial in the viewfinder that tells you how far or near you're focused, so you know that your camera has not focused on the background when it should be focused on your subject. And that's a really nice touch. That means that the images that you get out of this camera, most of them are going to be keepers, and a lot of the images you get, well, some of the images you get from some of these cameras, particularly this one, the all manual one, you'll have to work to get the keepers, you really do, but this one gives you them straight out the box, straight out of the pack, and it's great for that. It's not the smallest camera here, but it's very light and it's very easy to take around with you. And I know I've took this thing around, well, gosh, I've carried it pretty much everywhere because it's just my favourite film camera. It's so simple to use, it's so easy to use, and it has a very, very good lens as well. This lens is second to none in the compact world, and it even rivals some SLR lenses as well. This lens will make you some exquisite images. This really is all the film camera you need. I love these other cameras, but the Nikon is the easiest one to shoot, and honestly that's why I like it. This isn't the prettiest camera in the world. It is just a big square plastic brick, but it's so good I'm going to give it a pass for that. I've shot this camera in all sorts of conditions, in all sorts of locations, and it's so good, it's definitely a keeper. And you know, this is the film camera that I pick up the most often. I have quite a few SLRs, I've got various other film point and shoots, I've got one or two film rangefinders, but this one is always the one that I reach for first. It's so easy to use, it's so inconspicuous and low key that it's, I don't know, it's a fantastic camera. One of the great triumphs from the film days, one of the nicest cameras you can buy from the film days. These aren't cheap though, these are not the cheapest cameras in the world. I was lucky to find this one for £100, and you still can find them for £100. This was only about a year ago. You still can find them for about £100, but you do need to be patient. More likely, more often they're going to be in the £120 to £150 region. Still a lot cheaper than when they were new. When they were new in the 80s, late 80s, these cameras sold for about £300 or £400, I think. Do correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that that's right. So they're still far, far cheaper, and even cheaper still when you take into account inflation than when they were original. One of the world's best film cameras, and well worth investing in. So there we are. That's 5 beautiful film cameras. I've been impressed by all of them. I especially and particularly like this little pen. This is a little star. Absolutely beautiful little machine, and it's opened my eyes to half frame. Absolutely stunning little thing. As you know, because I've been going on about it, I do love my Nikon L35 AF as well, but whichever of these cameras you choose, they're going to make some fantastic images for you. My personal choice is just my personal choice. This camera is fully manual. This will really get you under the skin of photography, and to be able to make good images with this camera, you really need to know what you're doing and practice, practice, practice. Beautiful little Konica rangefinder, fantastic lens, very discreet. Lovely little Olympus Trip 35, again very discreet, beautiful styling, 5 fantastic cameras. They're ranging in price from about £10 to £20 to around about 120, maybe £150. All of them are bargains. All of them are widely available, but they won't always be because they don't make them anymore. So if you want one, grab one now. That would be my advice. So that's it from me for now. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring the jolly old bell before you go. And if you like the content on this channel and you'd like to help it grow and develop, you can do that at patreon.com/Zonography, and you can do that from as little as $1 per month. As ever, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zonography.